In real estate, we talk about just the location. But for these 8 Australian addresses, the most important factor isn't the suburb or the view. It's the ghost in the paperwork. In Australia, a handful of homes are known less for design and more for what once happened inside them. Former Bicky clubhouses watched by police, suburban rentals raided before sunrise, family homes where a single night changed everything and changed the value forever. One of the most infamous is 6 Collins Street, North Ryde. In July 2001, it became the site of a triple killing carried out by Seth Gonzalez. The house sat unwanted for years. When it finally sold in 2005, the fallout helped push New South Wales towards stricter rules on disclosing a property's history. Researchers have since shown the pattern is real. Homes directly linked to serious crime can sell at steep discounts, while nearby properties have recorded price drops of around 4% in the year that follows. Fear lingers longer than fresh paint. In this video, we trace 8 crime-linked addresses and ask one question. When a house has a story this heavy, can it ever truly be sold? Would you live in a place like that? Subscribe to the channel and let's begin. 8. North Ryde Murder House, 6 Collins Street, New South Wales, when a home became infamous. On a quiet street in North Ryde, nothing about 6 Collins Street looked unusual. New build, family area, the kind of place meant for fresh starts. But on July 10th, 2001, that image collapsed. Inside the home, 20-year-old Seth Gonzalez ended the lives of his parents and teenage sister. The case stunned Sydney, not just for what happened, but for what followed after the doors were closed. For months, Gonzalez played the role of a grieving son. Police later uncovered inconsistencies, and nearly a year after the deaths, he was arrested. A court found him guilty on 3 counts of murder, and he received life sentences with no parole. Justice was delivered, but the house remained, and the house became a problem no one knew how to solve. When the property went up for sale, buyers stayed away. Word spread fast. Inspections dried up. For 3 years, the home sat untouched, its value sinking under the weight of its history. In 2004, it finally appeared to sell, but there was a catch. The buyers were not told about what had happened there. They discovered the truth later through a newspaper article after contracts were already signed. The reaction was immediate. The sale collapsed. Regulators stepped in. The buyers demanded their money back and got it. The agency involved was fined for failing to disclose information that clearly mattered. When the house returned to the market with full transparency, it finally sold in November 2005 for $720,000, roughly 10% less than earlier deals. The discount wasn't about design or location. It was about memory. The impact didn't stop at the sale. The case helped reshape New South Wales real estate practices, reinforcing that agents must disclose any past events likely to affect a buyer's decision. Trust had been broken, and the system had to adjust. Today, 6 Collins Street is still a home. People still drive past, but its address carries a shadow that never fully fades. Because some houses don't just hold families, they hold stories the market can never forget. 7 Easy Street, Murder House, 147 Easy Street, Collingwood, a home that wouldn't let go. On a warm January night in 1977, something went terribly wrong inside a narrow terrace on Easy Street in Collingwood. 2 young women, Suzanne Armstrong, 28, and Susan Bartlett, 27, were found dead inside the home. In the next room, an 18-month-old child slept through the night, unaware that his life, and the street itself, had changed forever. The shock rippled fast. Collingwood was a tight community, and the idea that something so dark could happen inside an ordinary terrace left people uneasy. Locals avoided the house. Curtains stayed closed. The building stopped feeling like a place to live and started feeling like a reminder no one asked for. The home had been bought only months earlier, in late 1976, for under $20,000. After the crime, it sat heavy with silence. Years passed before it sold again, eventually changing hands in 1983 at a reduced price. But selling the bricks didn't sell the past. The case stayed unsolved, and the questions never went away. Over the decades, police returned to it again and again. New technology, new tips, old names re-examined. In 2017, authorities announced a $1 million reward, a clear signal that the case was still open and still haunting investigators. That same year, the house went back on the market. This time, it wasn't quiet. Headlines followed every inspection. When it sold for around $1.1 million, had time softened the impact? Or were buyers simply willing to live with a story they couldn't change? Then, in 2024, the past moved again. A suspect was arrested overseas, extradited to Australia, and brought before a Melbourne court. Suddenly, the story wasn't history. It was active. For Easy Street, the lesson was clear. Some houses don't just sit on land. They sit on unanswered questions. And until those questions are fully settled, that home will never be just an address. 6. Gladiators, Motorcycle Clubhouse, Horseshoe Bend, Maitland, when a clubhouse became a liability. For decades, the building at Horseshoe Bend sat quietly beside the Hunter River. Locals knew what it was. Outsiders learned quickly. This was the longtime clubhouse of the Gladiators Motorcycle Club, a group that first formed in the early 1960s and built a reputation across regional New South Wales. To members, the site represented loyalty and history. To the wider community, it was something to live around, not talk about too loudly. That uneasy balance collapsed in mid-2025. Tensions between outlaw motorcycle groups had been building for years, but in July 2025, the conflict became impossible to ignore. Rival bickies linked to the Hells Angels allegedly moved on the Horseshoe Bend clubhouse, triggering a confrontation that spilled beyond club politics and into public view. Soon after, a vehicle was set alight and driven into the front gates, a message meant to be seen, not hidden. Police moved quickly. Public safety orders were issued, barring Bicky members from the property. Firearms checks, license reviews, and compliance operations followed. What had once been a known but contained Bicky address became a high-risk site under constant attention. For the surrounding neighbourhood, the fallout was immediate. Residents who once complained about noise now worried about safety. Patrol cars became regular visitors. Media coverage tied the quiet riverside street to Bicky conflict, and that association spread fast online. The real estate impact was just as sharp. Properties nearby took longer to sell. Buyers asked questions that had nothing to do with layouts or views. Lenders hesitated. Insurers reassessed risk. Even developers who might have seen opportunity in the land stepped back, wary of the history attached to the address. In big cities, controversial sites can disappear under redevelopment. In a regional area like Maitland, stories stick. Search results don't fade. Old headlines resurface during every inspection. By the end of 2025, the Gladiators Clubhouse was no longer a symbol of power. It was a burden, a reminder that when outlaw culture collides with public space, the damage isn't limited to those involved. It spreads outward, reshaping streets, values, and trust long after the engines go quiet. 5. Morehouse Street Murder House. 3. Morehouse Street, Willagee, the Perth home that wouldn't let go. From the street, 3 Morehouse Street looks like just another house in Willagee. Brick walls, a neat yard, nothing that warns you to slow down. But in late 1986, this address became the centre of a case that shook Western Australia and never truly faded from public memory. Inside that home, David and Catherine Burney committed a series of crimes that horrified Perth. Over several weeks, 4 young women were taken to the house and never left. The case only ended when a 5th victim escaped, ran for help, and led police straight back to Morehouse Street. What followed was swift arrests, long prison sentences, and a suburb left struggling with the knowledge of what had happened behind an ordinary front door. After that, the house became something else, not just a property, but a reminder. It changed hands slowly. Some buyers walked away the moment they learned the address. Others believed time and renovations could erase the past. Over the years, the house was rebuilt inside more than once. New kitchens, new paint, new gardens. But the story stayed. When the property was listed again in 2015 and later in 2020, it drew national attention. Open homes attracted not just buyers, but curious onlookers. Agents reported difficult conversations and long campaigns. Price expectations shifted. Eventually, in 2021, the house sold for around $425,000, a figure many linked to both extensive renovation and the weight of its history. Real estate agents say homes like this carry an invisible cost. Buyers ask different questions. Marketing takes longer. Full disclosure becomes unavoidable. Even years later, internet searches bring the past back to the surface. Morehouse Street remains a lesson in how places remember. Walls can be repainted, floors replaced, but some stories don't leave with the old fittings. They stay in the address, forcing every new owner to decide whether they can live with history or whether some homes never fully let go. 4. Tony Mockbell's Brunswick House, 11 Down Street, a crime king's address that wouldn't let go. The two-storey Victorian at 11 Down Street, Brunswick looks like many others on the block. Iron lace, tall windows, a neat frontage, but its past refuses to stay quiet. In the early 2000s, this house became linked to one of Australia's most infamous crime figures, Tony Mockbell. During the height of Melbourne's gangland era, the property was tied to his bail arrangements, briefly helping him walk free, while courts argued over conditions and guarantees. That connection changed everything. When the house later came up for sale, it wasn't treated like a normal listing. In 2014, it sold for around 1.1 million Australian dollars, a price shaped as much by curiosity as by bricks and mortar. Open homes drew cameras, not just couples. The address had become part of the city's crime folklore, but the pattern repeated. In 2017, the home quietly re-entered the market with an asking price near 1.23 million Australian dollars. Again, interest came slowly. Agents focused on period features, natural light, and Brunswick's cafe culture, carefully avoiding the past. But buyers didn't need reminding. A quick search filled in the blanks. Behind the scenes, the stigma carried real costs. Banks applied extra checks. Insurers asked harder questions. Some buyers walked away after learning the history, worried less about safety and more about resale. Others stayed, but only if the price reflected the baggage. That's the hidden tax of notoriety. Structurally, the house is sound. Architecturally, it's desirable. But headlines don't fade like paint. They linger online, reshaping value long after court cases end. For neighbours, the address became a talking point. For sellers, it meant longer campaigns and trimmed expectations. For buyers, it posed a simple question. Is the discount worth the story? 11 Down Street has sold more than once, and it may sell again, but it never quite escapes its past. In real estate, history doesn't need to be inside the walls to live there. Sometimes it's already written into the address. 3. Rebels Clubhouses, Albion, Wright Street, and the long tail of stigma. Some buildings carry a weight you can feel before you step inside. In Albion, on the corner of Frodsham and Lucy Streets, a two-storey clubhouse became one of those places. In March 2007, the site was badly damaged in a revenge-driven fire that lit up the street and locked the address into Brisbane's memory. Years earlier, police activity had already marked the property, tying it to a wider bikie conflict that simmered across the city. Even after repairs, the attention never faded. Patrols lingered, neighbours stayed alert. The building's past followed every new chapter. Further south, Wright Street in Adelaide tells a similar story. In 1999, violence outside the Rebels club rooms there left 3 men dead and a community shaken. The event became a reference point, not just in crime reporting, but in real estate conversations that followed for decades. When properties linked to the site later came up for sale, interest was cautious. One former clubhouse struggled on the market before selling in 2019 for about $535,000, a figure below comparable sites nearby. The discount spoke louder than any listing description. These places aren't typical crime houses. They're conflict sites, addresses known for clashes, fires, raids, and long police histories. That kind of reputation hits differently. Developers see land value, but lenders see risk. Councils face pressure from residents who want peace restored, not another chapter added. Families nearby worry less about walls and more about what might return. Agents say stigma here doesn't fade quickly. Marketing takes longer. Inspections are tense. Buyers ask about history before they ask about zoning. Often the only clean exit is demolition. Sell the land, not the structure. Even then, the address keeps its story. In Albion, in Wright Street, the buildings may change, but the memory stays. And in property markets, memory has a price. 2. Fink's Clubhouse and outlaw sites when clubhouses become toxic real estate. From the street, the Cranbourne West site looks like any other warehouse on an industrial strip. Steel walls, roller doors, quiet by day. But its past refuses to stay quiet. In January 2019, police activity tied the address to a serious organised crime investigation. Then, in March 2020, a late-night attack left the building badly damaged, fencing scorched, and the site sealed off. Even after repairs, the address stayed in the spotlight. In 2022, hundreds of riders gathered there before a national run. A reminder that some places don't lose their meaning just because the doors close. That history turned the property into a problem asset. Once a building is publicly named as a gang base, the rules change. Banks hesitate. Insurers reassess. Councils field complaints from nearby residents worried about safety and reputation. What might be valuable industrial land on paper becomes hard to finance, harder to insure, and hardest of all, to sell without a discount. The numbers tell part of the story. Former and current clubhouse sites across Melbourne's southeast site on land worth millions combined, yet many remain underused or locked in legal and planning delays. Owners face repair bills after attacks, long vacancy periods after police action, and drawn-out sales campaigns when they try to exit. Agents report extended days on market and reserve prices quietly lowered to attract serious buyers. In more than one case, a sale only happened after a significant cut, simply to move the address on. But the real cost goes beyond balance sheets. Neighbours didn't sign up for headlines. Families worry about what might return. Small businesses nearby feel the chill when an area's name becomes shorthand for trouble. Councils debate demolition versus redevelopment, knowing that tearing down walls doesn't erase search results. Cranbourne West is the lesson. A site can be zoned right, priced right, and still carry a shadow that scares capital away. In real estate, reputation sticks. And when a clubhouse becomes infamous, every future deal pays the price. 1. Hell's Angels Club Rooms. 2 Albert Street, Clarence Gardens. Sold, but stigma stayed. On paper, 2 Albert Street, Clarence Gardens was a solid commercial parcel, around 800 square metres of land in Adelaide's inner south. Good access, strong zoning. But history weighed heavy. In mid-2019, the former Hells Angels Club Rooms went to auction. There were 2 registered bidders. Only one offer landed, $500,000, and it wasn't enough. The property passed in, silent and awkward. What followed told the real story. The site stayed listed for more than 70 days before finally selling on 21st November 2019 for $535,000. For land of that size and location, the number raised eyebrows. Agents quietly acknowledged what buyers already knew. Reputation had shaved the price. This wasn't just a building. For years, the address had been linked to serious bicky disputes and repeated police attention. News reports tied the club to wider investigations across South Australia, including raids on related rural properties and enforcement actions following multiple public incidents. Those headlines stuck. Anyone who inspected the site wasn't just picturing offices or workshops, they were picturing search results. The market reacted fast. Banks treated the site as higher risk. Insurance quotes came back cautious or expensive. Developers added extra lines to their budgets for security upgrades, cleanup works, and community consultation. Agents reported plenty of lookers, but fewer serious offers. Curiosity filled inspections, confidence did not. When the property finally sold, the buyer made it clear they planned to run a legitimate business. Still, locals knew the past wouldn't vanish overnight. Online listings, archived news, and whispered conversations kept the address anchored to its former life. Councils monitored the transition closely, and neighbours watched to see if the change would stick. Clarence Gardens shows a hard truth about real estate. You can repaint walls, you can change locks, you can even change owners. But when a place becomes known for the wrong reasons, that story becomes part of the land. And in this market, stories have a price tag. These houses prove one thing: walls remember. Long after horror fades, a past can cling to an address, shaping prices, trust, and sleep. Police move on, streets calm down. But buyers still ask the same quiet question before they sign: is this place safe to live in? Australia's market shows how fear becomes a cost and how disclosure, time, and change can soften, but rarely erase a story. Some homes recover, others never do. The lesson is simple and uneasy. A bargain may come with a burden you can't shake away. Would you take the discount or walk on? Share your thoughts below, like the video, subscribe, and thanks for watching.